how do you see the kind of information in terms of advantage that China may have gained?
Well, it's quite obvious that China would have an interest in a limited, this 4-day, war between India and Pakistan. And they would want to see what are the platforms India uses, what are the kind of technologies India has, and the fact that 81% of Pakistan military hardware is now of Chinese origin.
As somebody in the MEA, when there is a misinformation which is being put on television channels, is there a protocol and an action that kicks in?
We sometimes have to preempt false news from circulating rapidly.
We have a very special guest with us. We have with us Mr. Vikas Swarup, a prominent former Indian diplomat. He served as the High Commissioner of Canada and was also the official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs. He has held roles in Indian missions abroad, including London, Canada, Washington, DC, amongst others. He's, of course, most well known, other than his role as a former diplomat, on one of his books, Q&A, being adapted for the Oscar-winning Slumdog Millionaire. Mr. Swarup, thank you so much for joining us at Brut today. My first question to you is, we have very young viewers, Mr. Swarup, so can you explain to us what exactly does a ceasefire mean?
Well, strictly speaking, in legal terms, a ceasefire is a temporary cessation of hostilities between two warring parties, which allows space for mediation or other kinds of actions to happen. But the idea is that the two sides stop fighting immediately.
Right. And what we saw on the night of 10th May, once the ceasefire was announced, we did see drones were seen across Jammu, Rajasthan, all of these bordering areas again. What do you make of that situation?
Well, so obviously it means that Pakistan was not very serious about honoring that ceasefire, and they have tried to violate it. I think we have acted with restraint, and now the open question is whether the ceasefire will continue to hold, or will we see further violations by Pakistan, which of course would inevitably result in an Indian response as well.
In your experience at the External Ministry, have you seen Pakistan do this in terms of, we've had many ceasefires with Pakistan earlier as well. Has Pakistan always acted like this, and what could be the reasoning behind it?
Yes, if you look at the Pakistani playbook, they have violated a number of ceasefire understandings that we have reached in the past as well, particularly on the LOC, that there will be no firing across each other's, across the line of control. And Pakistan has violated it many times. We have seen so many civilian deaths as a result of indiscriminate mortar firing by Pakistan across the LOC.
Right. I'm going to shift gears a little bit first in terms of your tenure as spokesperson in the External Affairs Ministry. We saw what viewers were calling a very well put together communication from the External Affairs Ministry that happened. Also, there was a lot of symbolism when it comes to Operation Sindoor. We had an AV that ran, which spoke about how many people India has lost to terror. It was already sort of put together. We had, in terms of symbolism, to women officers representing and speaking. Could you tell us a little bit about what goes behind the scenes when you're preparing to communicate, when the government is preparing through the External Affairs Ministry to communicate in a situation which is escalating very quickly?
So Mehak, the first thing we have to recognize is that the whole pattern of warfare has changed now in the 21st century. Earlier warfare was fought strictly on the battlefield. And your success or failure depended on how many assets you lost or gained. And nowadays, that has changed completely. War is increasingly fought not just on the battlefield, but also in the information space, especially at a time when social media has become so important and so prominent. A lot of people get their primary source of information from social media. So from that point of view, it was important that India also ramp up on the information side. And that is why I think you saw very clear, very focused briefings by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, where our Foreign Secretary was flanked by two women officers. And one of the officers was, as you know, Colonel Sophia Qureshi. And I think the idea was to show that this is India's Nari Shakti in action. And more importantly, it is India's secularism in action. Because Pakistan defines itself as the Islamic State of Pakistan. It's the home of the Muslims. But India never defined itself as the Hindu state of India. We were always a secular state, which was enshrined in our constitution. So I think this was a very powerful display of India's diversity on display. Don't forget, Vikram Misri himself is a Kashmiri Pandit.
Right.
So from that point of view, I think, and the fact, the choice of Operation Sindoor was also very symbolic. At the end of the day, what did these terrorists do? they basically segregated all the tourists. They segregated the men. They asked them to confirm their religion. Those that were Hindu were then put in one particular box and gunned down mercilessly in front of their family members. So a lot of women lost their husbands, and as you know, the sindoor is the vermilion, powder that women put to symbolize their marriage status. So the choice of Operation Sindoor was to show that we are avenging the women whose husbands you mercilessly gunned down.
Right. Mr. Swarup, as a spokesperson in the External Affairs Ministry, can you give us, when a spokesperson comes out and speaks, how behind the scenes, how does that work? So in terms of
I tell you, it's probably the most stressful job in the government of India, I suppose in any administration, being the spokesperson. For instance, every Thursday at 4 p.m. I used to have my press conference. 70 journalists would sit in front of me and they could ask me any question under the sun. And a good spokesman is one who can take a pass at maybe one, maximum two questions saying, I don't know about this, I'll get back to you. But if you take a pass on more than two questions, you're not a good spokesperson. So what this entailed was, Monday to Thursday morning, we would pore over all the newspapers and try to see what are the possible questions that could come this week. But at the end of the day, you would always have to be prepared for some questions which came out of syllabus, so to speak. And there it's very simple. If the question pertains to Pakistan, you know the template you have to answer. Basically, if it's something pertaining to their support to terrorism, then you know what to answer. And I think that's where being a diplomat, the training as a diplomat comes in handy, because there are many things which you remember just from being a diplomat, from being in diplomatic situations, etc. That what is the template to answer questions on a specific set of issues. So even if those questions pertain to something which is not in that immediate week or so, then your training as a diplomat probably comes in handy.
The toughest job, especially when escalations are taking place.
And more importantly, Mehak, also, in the Ministry of External Affairs, you have the Foreign Secretary who looks after a specific set of countries and issues. Then you have Secretary East who looks after a specific set of countries and issues. You have Secretary West who looks after specific sets of countries and issues. You have two other secretaries who look after economic issues and consular issues. But the spokesman has to answer on anything and everything under the sun, which means he has to be a know-it-all.
Know-it-all. We saw the first press conference that was held by the MEA. They, of course, gave information, did not take questions, which was because it was escalating really quickly, the situation. The second press conference which was held, questions were taken. Do you think this was normal in terms of an escalating situation to actually give the media a chance to ask questions? Because
you see, when you are in the fog of war, a lot of misinformation is also circulating. And especially we saw some of the irresponsible TV channels, the kind of headlines they were promoting, etc. They were generating a war hysteria, really. So I think it was important that the government of India, through its official spokespersons, clarify the situation and clear any doubts that may be lingering in the minds of some people who had watched unverified news on either social media handles or TV channels.
Mr. Swarup, misinformation really is at the center of a lot of what we saw unfold. The government's official statements also, it went out of its way to clarify on a lot of misinformation on either side of the borders as well, which was circulating. As somebody in the MEA, when there is a misinformation which is being put on television channels or carried otherwise, is there a protocol and an action that kicks in on actually reaching out to these media outlets and telling them what they're running? Please, tell our viewers on how it works.
Yes, because you see, information travels at the speed of light. So your response to false statements, to misinformation also has to travel at the speed of light. And that's why if you saw the PIB was putting out information almost immediately. I mean, Pakistan claimed they had destroyed an airbase, for instance. In the north, and immediately we put out that no, this has not happened. Similarly, again, Pakistan put out that we had destroyed an S-400 entire battery, and again we immediately put out and said that this was false information. Nothing of that kind had happened. So I think it's important that we have to be very, very proactive, and we have not just to be reactive. We sometimes have to preempt false news from circulating rapidly.
Right. What are the protocols, if you could tell our viewers, on when there is a escalation in terms of combat, etc. happening? What kind of information, or would you advise, let's say, even television channels or media outlets, what kind of information to put out? Because what we've really seen unfold in the last couple of days is a ball by ball almost commentary on what the action at the front could possibly be happening.
Yeah, but first of all, much of that commentary was based on completely unverified sources. It was based largely on conjecture. We have gone and taken over this city or that city, or we have destroyed this or destroyed that from both sides. I think, by the television channels. So my sense is that we should not watch, these kinds of channels and the kind of wild conjectures that they indulge in, because it's bad for our mental health also at the end of the day. People got very, very concerned. The feeling was that war is breaking out immediately, general mobilization is going to happen, tanks have already been mobilized, etc., when it was nothing of that sort. Let's not forget, India had made it clear from day one of Operation Sindoor that our operation was precise, calibrated, proportionate, and non-escalatory in nature. We did not want a war. We were just clear that we are going to destroy terrorist infrastructure. And I think the paradigm shift that Operation Sindoor represented was that in the past, the line of control was seen as sacrosanct. That was, of course, broken through Uri, our response to what happened in Uri in 2016. Then in Balakot in 2019, as you know, we even went beyond the LOC to attack a terrorist camp in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And this time, we have struck deep inside Pakistan proper. Bahawalpur is located 100 kilometers from the international boundary. And the fact that our cruise missiles could reach even as far as 100 kilometers inside represents, I believe, a paradigm shift. We have made it very clear that henceforth, any act of cross-border terrorism will be treated as an act of war and will invite a swift, decisive, and devastating response.
You led me to my next question, which was exactly on this, on just before the ceasefire was announced, any cross-border terrorism being taken as act of war. That's what the Indian government put out. What does this change and mean for India and possibly even South Asia at this time?
No, I think what it means is that we have now drawn a line in the sand. If Balakot was really a line drawn in the sand, this is now a line drawn in concrete. That now, if you do cross-border terrorism, and especially of the level that we saw in Pahalgam, of the heinousness, the barbarity that we saw in Pahalgam, it will immediately invite an Indian military response. Of course, we were very careful that that military response was targeted exclusively at the terrorist infrastructure of the known terrorist groups operating in Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen. We deliberately did not target Pakistani military infrastructure or civilians in that first instance. Only when Pakistan retaliated and started targeting civilians through the cross-LOC fire and targeting our military installations through drone attacks and missiles, that is when we also escalated. And I think this was, the escalation was really going up till we had the ceasefire announcement. So now I think it represents a new strategic normal. That is what we have now made clear. This is a new strategic normal. Any act of cross-border terrorism will invite a decisive military response. And Pakistan has been made aware that no military infrastructure, no matter how deep inside Pakistan, is safe from our aircraft and from our missiles.
I want to ask you on how would, in a couple of decades, this been looked at as far as Prime Minister Modi is concerned. From 2014 to now, like you mentioned, Balakot, it's been compared a lot of times from other prime ministers and the stances that they have taken, whether it was when we had the parliament attack and many other 2611. How do you see this stance, and do you think it is something which is paid off? Why I ask you this is because we've had opposition in the past, opposition leaders in the past come up and question that maybe this stance is not working because we've had sort of terror, incidents coming up over and over again. What is your reading?
So I would say that prior to Prime Minister Modi coming onto the scene, if you look at the India playbook in response to terrorist attacks, it was largely strategic restraint. Even when Kargil happened, we deliberately chose to tell our Air Force not to cross the line of control. We would suffer heavy casualties, but we would not cross the LOC, for instance. So this was really an expression of strategic restraint. But what Prime Minister Modi has done is there is strategic restraint, but now it is combined with deterrence. Okay. From Uri it happened, where surgical strikes, Pakistan never ever imagined that India would actually send in commandos inside Pakistani territory or inside, let's say, Pakistan occupied Kashmir to take revenge for what happened in Uri. And then in Balakot, we actually sent our planes deep inside Pakistani territory to bomb terrorist infrastructure. And this time, of course, we did not cross the airspace, but we sent our cruise missiles deep into Pakistan, as I said, 100 kilometers deep inside Pakistani territory to take out terrorist infrastructure. So I think that is what it has done, that it has re-established deterrence. Because you see, post Balakot, let's not forget, happened in 2019,
right.
6 years ago. And many people thought, Pakistanis especially thought, oh, Balakot is a one-off thing, it's done and dusted, and that deterrence factor is no longer in play. Well, we have now showed them very clearly that do not live under that dangerous illusion. The deterrence effect is very much in play, and it has come back with double vengeance this time by attacking you deep inside your own territory. We will take out terrorist infrastructure wherever it exists, as long as it targets Indian interests. Right. I think that is the message that we have given. Having said that, this does not mean that that's the end of terrorism. Because, cross-border terrorism is the hardest kind of terrorism to fight. Because it's a proxy war. It's asymmetric warfare, where one party, which promotes these terrorist groups, uses them as proxies. They are not coming in their fatigues. They are sending in these Tanzim groups, to go and either carry out Fidaiin attacks or other kinds of attacks. And they have plausible deniability. Oh, we have nothing to do with this, right, as Pakistan said. And that's why this kind of terrorism is very difficult to fight. So I think what it requires is the 3 Ps. You have to predict, you have to prevent, you have to preempt, and you have to prevent.
Predict, preempt, and prevent. And a deterrent is what the...
yes, so that is what we have, as I said, we have now shown that if you attack innocent civilians in India in the kind of numbers that you did, it will invite a very punishing, decisive retaliatory strike from us. And we will take out terrorist infrastructure, no matter how deep inside Pakistan it exists. That's what we have shown.
I want to bring in China here really quickly. I was reading a piece earlier on, which also talked about how the escalation which has happened between India and Pakistan, China has gained a lot of information on the kind of responses that India has done. How do you see the kind of information in terms of advantage that China may have gained in what has just played out?
Well, it's quite obvious that China would have an interest in a limited, this 4-day, war between India and Pakistan, because at the end of the day, China is an adversary. We fought a war in 1962. We had this standoff. We are having a continuing standoff on the line of actual control as well. So China would have an obvious interest, and they would want to see what are the platforms India uses, what are the kind of technologies India has, how have the Rafales performed, etc. So obviously China would gather a lot of information on this, and the fact that 81% of Pakistan military hardware is now of Chinese origin. 81%.
81%.
81%, which means that they would also be interested in knowing how their platforms have performed in Pakistan. So from that point of view, yes, China would have gained a lot of information based on this, because you see, this is the first time we saw a war between India and Pakistan which was fought entirely using drones and missiles and artillery fire.
Right.
There was no tanks. No tanks were involved. No, combat troops were involved. This was really fought on a very high-tech platform, mainly using drones. And that's why I think China would also take whatever lessons it can from this. That if tomorrow there is a war between India and China, how is that war going to be? How is that war going to pan out? What kind of platform could be used? What kind of technologies China would use? I think for us also there have been a lot of learnings, because we now understand, what is the depth in Pakistan, how do the air defenses work, etc., and how they can be taken out.
Right. So a lot of information on both sides.
Yes, I think war is always a means to sort of gather information on future scenarios, right, and do war gaming based on that.
Based on that. I very quickly want to talk about the US here. Almost in 24 hours, we had 2 very different statements coming in from the Trump administration. The first saying it's between 2 countries, we don't control them, they're not going to listen to us, we're a third party. Pretty much the official stance that India has as well, that we do not broker with a third party when it comes to decisions which are being taken. 24 hours later, completely different statements coming out there. US brokered ceasefire. What happened?
So I would say, look, Pakistan was looking for an off-ramp, because Pakistan could not sustain a long drawn-out war. Their economy is in shambles right now. This is the 24th time that they have taken a bailout package from the IMF. The latest one is for $7 billion, as you know. And in fact, a tranche was due to them just as the war was happening.
Right.
So from that point of view, Pakistan was in a very parlous situation, and they wanted, something which could diffuse the tension. They had to show that they are responding to Operation Sindoor, but, they did not have the staying power for a very long, drawn-out conflict. Because of the sheer disparity between India and Pakistan, not just in terms of their economy, but also in terms of their military assets. So I think the fact that Rubio, in his concurrent capacity as the National Security Advisor, spoke to General Asim Munir, directly. And I think that, to me, was the catalyst that led to the de-escalation. The carrot, of course, was the conditional release of the $1 billion IMF tranche to Pakistan, that look, if you behave and you do not escalate, then we are ready to release this money to you. And I think that is what persuaded Pakistan eventually to call off the hostilities, because let's not forget, in terms of the sequencing, the call came from the Pakistan DGMO to our DGMO at 3:35 p.m.
Right.
Earlier, I think there was another call in the morning at 9 a.m.,
right,
which we did not really respond to. But then the call came at 3:35 p.m. after the conversation between Rubio and Asim Munir. And that's where he offered that we are ready to cease all operations. We had been saying publicly for a very long time that if you don't escalate, we have no desire to escalate. We will reciprocate. And that's why we also accepted that. And hopefully, and I'm hoping that the ceasefire will hold. Of course, the US will claim credit. Right. Because the Pakistanis have publicly thanked the Americans.
Right. Tell our viewers, how is a ceasefire negotiation done?
Yeah, this one I think was fairly straightforward. The deal was that all hostilities will stop.
Right.
So that's why if you see the ceasefire deal mentions very clearly air, land and sea. So it's not that you just stop artillery fire and the air strikes can continue, the cruise missiles can continue to go back and forth, or the Navy starts, submarines start firing something, etc. So it was very clear that it was a ceasefire on all fronts. And I think there was not much negotiation. India and Pakistan did not really speak to each other before this.
Right.
I think the US spoke to Pakistan and said, look, we have spoken to the Indians. They have once again confirmed that they are ready to stop hostilities if you don't escalate. Are you prepared to de-escalate now? And Pakistan probably said, yes, we are happy to de-escalate now. And I think that's how things proceeded from there.
Right. Can you give us a bit of anecdote? I know you've been in quite hair-raising situations in your missions abroad. Can you share any anecdotes with us from those times?
No, really. Look, war is not a funny business. I think war is devastating. It is one thing to do warmongering sitting in the safety and air-conditioned comfort of a TV studio. But actually, wars are devastating. And, wars have very massive. They have economic costs, they have human costs, they have political costs, they have diplomatic costs. And I think especially at this point in time when, the world economy has just recovered from COVID, our economy has rebounded very beautifully after COVID. In fact, we are now the fastest growing major economy in the world. We did not want to lose that economic momentum through a long drawn out war with Pakistan. And that's why we made it very clear from day one that this is a non-escalatory strike. It's a targeted precision strike on terrorist infrastructure. We have no intention of escalating it. We are not targeting Pakistan military or civilians. And if Pakistan does not escalate, then that would be the end of it, because we would have avenged the massacre at Pahalgam. But because Pakistan chose to escalate, we also went onto the escalation ladder, and things might have gotten out of hand till I think good sense prevailed upon Pakistan, and they decided that, okay, I think it's in our interest now to dial down the tension and to go back to status quo.
It's been called a fragile ceasefire. What happens now? And I want to specifically talk about one very small fragment in that statement coming in from the US, which says that there will be negotiations or talks at a neutral place between the two countries. Now, this is something, that we were speaking about is actually not India's stance in terms of talking,
yes.
Right? So give us a little bit of sense of how you look into that.
So my sense is India has made it very clear there were neither any preconditions nor post-conditions attached to the ceasefire deal. The ceasefire deals means, okay, the two sides stop the escalation ladder completely. They cease fire. They do not attack each other's either by air, land or sea. That's the end of the matter. This part, which is in the US statement that both sides have agreed now to meet at a neutral venue to discuss all outstanding issues, I think represents, at this point in time at least, wishful thinking on the part of the US.
Okay.
Because we have made it very clear, terror and talks do not go together. We have never said that we will never talk to Pakistan. We have said we are ready to talk to Pakistan, but only if Pakistan dismantles the terrorist infrastructure in its place, which has been targeting India all this while, adheres to the Islamabad Declaration where Pakistan said that we will not allow our territory to be used for terrorism against any other country. So if Pakistan is sincere about these efforts, the bilateral dialogue can resume. But if that does not happen, then I suppose we will continue to remain in the present state that we are. And let's not forget, the very first steps that India announced when, in response to the Pahalgam massacre was the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, of keeping it in abeyance, of the cutting down further on the diplomatic strength of the two missions in Islamabad and in Delhi, and withdrawal of the naval, air and defense attaches on the two sides, the complete suspension of all trade, and basically asking all Pakistanis who were in India on those special visas to return back to Pakistan. So those measures continue to remain in place. There are no talks on those. That will only happen if Pakistan decides that, yes, we accept the fact that terrorist infrastructure has to be brought down. I think what we have made clear, especially through the Indus Waters Treaty, is, water is life, but terror is death. And we have made it clear, Pakistan does not get to choose both. You have to choose one of the two.
India's stance on the Indus Water Treaty holds. Is it like going to war without going to war? What really will happen now that India has taken the stance?
Well, we have now used it primarily as a strategic leverage. Because let's not forget, 80% of Pakistan's agriculture depends on the waters of the Indus. 1/3 of the electricity is generated from the waters of the Indus. So if India now decides that henceforth we are not going to allow you, because India is the,
the origin for the...
India is the exact. Pakistan is downstream, we are upstream. So we have the power to control the flow of waters downstream. So if we decide that we are not going to allow the waters to flow down, currently we do not have that capacity for the simple reason that most of the projects on the rivers on our side are run-of-the-river projects, which means they do not have large storage capacities. But this is, if the Indus Water Treaty is now in abeyance, we are now completely unconstrained. We can build as many dams and large-scale reservoirs as we want. And there, if those waters are released, then you could flood Pakistan whenever you want. You could stop water from going to Pakistan and cause a famine-like situation. So I think just as a pressure tactic, I think this is probably the most serious situation that Pakistan would face.
And what does this do in terms of, let's call it, water wars for South Asia? Because there are a number of rivers originating in China, and India is downstream for it. Bangladesh, again, is different. So in this entire South Asia basin, are we going to see a lot of water politics perhaps come in?
Well, certainly, I think water has become a very important trigger now for conflicts all across the world, not just in our region. Because, water, as I said, is life. And if anybody threatens that life, then that can lead to unpredictable consequences. So there's no doubt that water stress, because, the groundwater is going down all over. In fact, glaciers are no longer melting at the speed at which they used to melt and things like that. So water stress is real. And I think to the extent that we can have a cooperative transboundary water management is good for everyone. Let's not forget the preamble of the Indus Waters Treaty. What does it say? The preamble is a very short one. When the treaty was negotiated in 1960, it says that in a spirit of friendship and goodwill. And then in another line, it says in a cooperative spirit. So let us not separate the context of the treaty from the actual treaty itself.
Right.
If the context is now changed, if there is no longer friendship, if there is no longer goodwill, if there is no longer a cooperative spirit, then how can a treaty hold? So, and I have been Director Pakistan. I have seen how Pakistan has put obstacles in the path of any and every developmental project that we have tried to do, even on the rivers that are on our side. Saying that, no, this is not allowed, this will control this. On Baglihar, they created a problem. On Kishan Ganga, they created a problem. Ratli, they almost stopped. So, they have really created a lot of problems for us on all the projects that we have tried to do, under the Indus Waters Treaty. And that's why India, even before Pahalgam, India had been asking for a revision, because we are saying the glacier melts are no longer what they used to be.
Right.
Climate change has completely changed the whole water scenario, and we need to sit down and once again renegotiate, the terms of that particular treaty, which Pakistan was not accepting, till we have unilaterally decided that we are putting that treaty in abeyance.
Right. My last question on this is, how do you read into the responses from each of the G7 which came in when the escalation began? Any surprises there for you?
No, I think this is again part of the familiar international playbook, because let's not forget, any time there is a conflict between India and Pakistan post 1980s, the nuclear dimension comes into play. And Pakistan always exploits that and plays it up that, oh, Kashmir is a nuclear flashpoint, we are two nuclear armed countries, and if you don't come in and stop this and do third party intervention, then things can go out of hand. We have always believed that nuclear weapons are weapons of deterrence, not blackmail. Pakistan, of course, has a different playbook. They always try to, do nuclear blackmail and try to invite third-party intervention. So I think the statement that came out of the G7, the statement that came out of the UN Security Council, the statement that came out of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, the US, the UK, they're all par for the course. What is important is all of them expressed full solidarity with India as a victim of cross-border terrorism, and all of them allowed India that, yes, you have the right to pursue justice for what has happened. So that, I think, was very clear, including the Security Council statement. And I think we have the action that we took under Operation Sindoor is part of what is allowed to us, even under the UN Charter, that we have to, secure justice for an act of terror.
Right. Do you think in terms of Operation Sindoor, which was done, the statement, of course, coming in from the government was, with the intelligence agencies, all of these 9 targets were looked at. Do you think there has been sharing of intelligence on terror targets with other countries in the West?
No, I don't think so, because, our own intelligence operation is quite robust, and I think we have precise, idea of where each of these terror factories are located within Pakistan, and that's why we could target them so precisely. So I don't think we needed any external, support in terms of that. What was important is we took some of our close partners into confidence that, look, we are going to be taking this action, and this action is going to be very proportionate, very measured, very responsible, and not non-escalatory in nature. So from that point of view, I think we took some of our close partners into confidence, because I think all of them were expecting, post Uri, a new normal has already been established, that India does not allow these cross-border acts of terror to go unpunished.
A new normal has been established. Mr. Swarup, thank you so much for speaking to Brut.
My pleasure.